The pendulum clock on the oak shelf ticked steady, as though the whole room breathed in time with it. Noon light spilled through the window of Abilene, Texas, leaving pale gold streaks across the wall. A heavy oak desk stood at the center, its edges spotted with old ink stains, bearing witness to 100 bargains struck before it. Behind the desk, Attorney Richard Holland adjusted the thin steel rim of his spectacles and spoke in a voice calm yet edged with weight. "The final clause in the will of Mr. William Carter," he paused, his eyes sliding toward the two seated across from him, "states this: the heir shall inherit the entire estate only if two conditions are met. First, he must care for a hog for 9 months, ensuring it does not die under any circumstance. Second, he must live with a lawful wife during that same span, and no formal complaint may be filed with this office." The words fell like a stone tossed into still water. Silence spread thick in the room. Ezekiel Carter leaned back in his chair, his dusty boots tapping against the wood floor. 35 years old, broad-shouldered, face weathered by sun and wind, with blue eyes quick to spark into flame. A man used to throwing his full weight into breaking land, driving cattle, and raising fences, now told he must pass some test of wife and hog. His jaw locked, breath drawn hard through his teeth. "Counselor," Ezekiel's voice rasped low, "you're playing me for a fool? I've dragged steers out of mud holes. I've stood through whiplash snowstorms, and now I'm to keep company with a hog, and a wife besides." Richard Holland did not so much as flinch, as though he had expected that flare of temper. "Yes, Mr. Carter, that was your uncle's last will. If you will not abide by it, you inherit nothing. There is no room for compromise." Ezekiel turned his gaze toward the woman seated opposite. For the first time, he truly looked at Selah Johnson. Selah was 28. Her skin bore the rich hue of walnut, her hair drawn back neatly, her face calm with the stillness of one who had weathered storms of her own. Folks called her a widow, her husband taken by summer fever 2 years past. Since then, she had carried the weight of a roadside inn and a garden patch behind it. Her hands, calloused yet clean, rested straight on her lap, speaking of dignity and self-reliance. Their eyes met. In Ezekiel's, suspicion. In Selah's, caution. Yet behind both, a flicker of curiosity. Selah cleared her throat, her voice steady, cut through with resolve. "Mr. Carter, if I understand rightly, this condition demands that we live together, and together raise this hog." "That's correct," the lawyer said, flipping back to the page as if to prove it. "Exactly so. And let me stress this. No complaint may be filed. A single grievance, and the inheritance is forfeit." Ezekiel gave a dry, humorless laugh. "You want me under one roof with a stranger, tending a hog, keeping peace 9 long months. That's less a test than a prison." Selah tilted her head, her dark eyes sharp on him. "If you call it prison, you've already lost. I don't ask for care from anyone, but I won't be treated as something excess either. If this is a way to build a start for myself, I'll weigh it." The words cut through Ezekiel's pride like a blade. He met her steady look, seeing strength hidden in the silence of a woman who had endured more than he reckoned. Attorney Holland folded his hands. "I care not how you come to the match. All that matters is a lawful marriage and signatures on this pledge. Time will settle the rest." The air thickened. Ezekiel leaned his elbows against the table, eyes on the grain of the oak. His mind stirred with memories, cracked hands, a back bent under sweat, years of labor and a dream of land never his own. This chance, however strange, might be the only one. Sela sat quiet, though her heart pounded fast. Since her husband's death, she had grown accustomed to silence, to the sharp eyes of neighbors. This could be a door, or it could be a cliff. She caught Ezekiel's eyes again, blunt, hot, but not evasive. "Well, Mr. Carter?" the lawyer pressed. Ezekiel's mouth bent into a grim smile. His voice came rough, but firm. "If this is my uncle's wish, I'll do it. Not for the hog, nor for some sham of marriage. I do it for the land, and I don't quit." Sela inclined her head slowly, answering with quiet certainty. "Then I'll do it as well. Not for the man gone, not for a test meant to prove me. I do it for a future I can build myself." Lawyer Holland breathed out, and for the first time, let a hint of a smile show. He had seen enough to know a story was about to unfold. He laid 2 papers on the desk before them. 2 hands reached, one rough and cracked, the other dark and steady. Both signed. The pendulum clock struck 3 times, each note heavy and sure. A new chapter began. 9 months, 1 hog, 1 marriage, and a trial neither of them yet knew how deep it would run. The road from Abilene back to the ranch stretched 12 dusty miles, laid over with red earth and brittle spring grass. Wagon wheels groaned and clattered, each jolt pressing deeper into the tight silence between 2 people bound now by a peculiar contract. Ezekiel held the reins, his broad shoulders rigid as stone. Sela sat on the other side, her hands folded close to her chest, her dark eyes fixed on the wide Texas land baked red beneath the sun. They were not yet used to speaking. Only the rhythm of hooves and the whistle of wind cut the air. Ezekiel stole glances now and then, seeing her pull her shawl closer around her frame, yet her eyes did not falter. She looked straight ahead, as though she would not let him or anyone see the quick shadow of unease that passed behind them. The cabin came into view by the time the sun tilted westward, laying gold over its gray roof shingles. 2 rooms, stone chimney rising tall, and beside it, a rotted pen where beams hung loose and splintered. Ezekiel ground his jaw. He had known it was in ruin, but the sight still stung. "This is where we'll be," he said, voice rough. Sela stepped down, skirts brushing up the road dust. She studied the place, fences sagging, grass stripped bare, porch paint peeling. But her eyes caught on a patch of earth fit for planting and the stone well gurgling clear water at the side. "Old," she said softly, "but not dead." Ezekiel glanced at her, startled. It had been a long while since anyone spoke of this land, with even a flicker of hope. In those first days, they worked side by side. Sela swept the ash from the hearth, shook the dust from bedding, and chased cobwebs from corners. Ezekiel patched the barn roof and dug into the soil to mark a pen for a hog neither had yet bought. On the 3rd day, they rode into the market fair. Voices hawked loud, children darted between stalls, and the hog pens clattered with squeals. Ezekiel moved quick, seasoned in the picking of livestock. Sela kept close, her hem brushing his trouser leg each step. He noticed, but said nothing. The seller, old Cobb, pointed at a sturdy piglet, spotted coat, bright eyes, feeding greedy from the trough. Ezekiel nodded approval, but Sela stepped past, crouched to a smaller piglet nosing the dirt in the corner. She stretched out a slim brown hand. The piglet lifted its snout, sniffed, and leaned in as if it had known her long before. "This one," she said. Ezekiel frowned. Too small. Might not make 9 months. Her gaze rose, met his square. It knows how to find a person. That's enough to begin. Something in her look held firm as oak. Ezekiel let the argument fall. He dropped a gold coin on the table, took a sack of feed, and let Cobb lift the piglet into the wagon. All the way back, the creature squealed sharp, yet Sela held it close, hand stroking slow, as if it were a babe. Ezekiel caught the gentle shift in her face, a softness rare beneath her guarded calm. At the pension ranch, they set to raising the pen. Ezekiel drove stakes deep with heavy swings, sweat rolling. Sela rolled up her sleeves, steadied the posts with her own hands, not shrinking from the dirt. "No need," he muttered. "I'll handle it." She looked him straight. "We handle it together." He said nothing more, and when their hands brushed on the hammer's worn grip, the touch was fleeting, yet it stopped him cold. His breath hitched. Sela stiffened too, eyes sliding away, color rising in her cheeks. Neither spoke of it. They struck harder into the wood, the blows ringing louder, as though sound itself might cover the awkward heat that sparked between them. By evening the pen stood ready, 20 by 30 feet, roof slats overhead, trough linked to the well. The piglet tottered in, snuffling, circling before flopping down in the corner, already claiming it as home. Sela braced her hands on her hips, wiping sweat from her brow. The last light rimmed her hair in gold, a thin crown on her dark silhouette. Ezekiel watched her, a strange stir in his chest. Not desire's burn, but something slower, something steady like the start of a root driving deep. "The hog seems content," Sela said softly. "Let's hope it lasts 9 months," Ezekiel answered. Their eyes met. No long stare, no words, yet enough to charge the quiet air with meaning. That night, Ezekiel sat alone on the porch, the hog rustling in its pen, the sky dark wide above. He remembered the brief touch of her hand that day. His own, hardened by years of rope and plow, had brushed against a strength wrapped in warmth. It was not the land, not the stock, not the storms he had battled, but something else altogether, something no field or herd could give. He did not speak of it, not even to himself. But in that silence, Ezekiel knew this trial was never only about a hog or a will. It was about a woman, Sela Johnson, and the trial of his own heart. The first morning on the ranch began with a rooster's call, faint and wandering from somewhere out on the prairie, followed by the squealing of a piglet in the new pen. Ezekiel rose while the sky was still dim. He was long shaped by ranch life, days that began before sunrise and ended when night swallowed the fields whole. Sela was already awake. She sat by the stove, coaxing flame from dry kindling, her face lit soft by the glow of coals. Smoke clung to her neatly bound hair, yet her eyes were clear and sharp. Ezekiel paused, surprised. He had thought a widow accustomed to running a boarding house might balk at tending fire in a drafty cabin at dawn, but she worked quiet and quick, as though she had always known how. "You don't need to be up this early," Ezekiel muttered. She glanced up, the edge of a smile tugging at her mouth. "I've been rising early for years. A boarding house doesn't run itself." He said nothing more, only took up a bucket and stepped outside. The morning air was cool and damp, mist clinging to the fence rails. The piglet ran circles, eyes bright, squealing sharp as hunger pulled at its belly. Ezekiel poured feed into the trough. The creature dove in, chomping with such noise the pen rattled with life. He leaned against the fence, wiping sweat from his brow, though the sun had barely crested. The first days were packed heavy, cleaning stalls, checking water lines, splitting wood. He worked hard, as he always had, with no complaint. Sela came out with a wooden cup of water. She set it on the rail. "Drink." Ezekiel looked at her. Their eyes met for a breath, his rimmed with fatigue, yet carrying a resolve she had never seen in any man since her husband's death. She faltered, then stepped back. So their days fell into rhythm. Morning feedings, mucking pens, hauling water. Sela swept the cabin, cooked, scrubbed clothes. Sometimes, in the afternoon, they moved together in the yard, Sela planting herbs, Ezekiel hammering posts. Few words passed, but the silence between them grew less heavy. Still, the smell of pig clung everywhere. One evening, when a south wind carried the stench straight into the cabin, Sela wrinkled her nose, set down her bowl of soup, and snapped sharper than she meant. "I can't stand it. You carry hog smell into every corner, into the house, the food, everywhere." Ezekiel froze. The vein in his neck swelled, anger rising quick and fierce. He remembered too many times when his temper had burned him. Brawls in saloons, jobs lost for fights he couldn't walk away from. One word more and he would wreck it all, the will, the land, and whatever fragile thread held him and the woman before him. He turned away. On the pig pen hung a rough plank he had nailed there himself. 3 breaths before you act. Ezekiel stood still. Inhale. Exhale. 1, 2, 3. The fire cooled, rain on coals. He turned back, voice measured. "I'll build a wash station out by the porch. Before I come in, I'll clean off. The smell won't follow me inside." Sela stared at him, caught off guard. She had braced for fury, not restraint. What she saw in his face was not grudging concession, but a man wrestling himself to keep a promise. No complaints, no failures, 9 months straight. That very evening, Ezekiel built the washstand, drawing water from the well. He rinsed his hands, his face, changed his shirt before stepping into the cabin. When he came in, the stench had eased. Sela, setting the table, flicked her eyes toward him. Her gaze lingered a moment on the damp collar clinging to his neck, the sweat trickling from his temple. Just for that moment, she looked at him not as a burden tied to her by law, but as a man making honest effort. The look was brief, but enough to strike him in the chest. He bent over his chair, feigning distraction, though his heart beat harder. Habits grew. At dawn, Ezekiel went to the pen. Sela stoked the fire. When he returned, his shirt damp with work, she left cool water on the table. At supper, they sat across from each other. They spoke little, yet their eyes no longer flinched away. One afternoon, Ezekiel split logs in the yard. Sela stepped out from the kitchen, hair loosened by the wind. She watched a moment. The sun poured over his shoulders, sweat darkening his shirt, his calloused hands swinging the axe steady, each blow certain. He worked like a man determined that nothing they had built would fall. Her chest ached with a feeling she could not name. She turned back inside, but the sight clung to her even as she lit the oil lamp. Ezekiel too remembered the glance. It had not been scorn, nor pity, nor suspicion, those he knew too well. It was something else. Recognition, perhaps respect, perhaps more. Night fell with the sound of the pig snuffling in its pen and wind hissing through the rails. The cabin glowed warm with lamplight. They sat apart at the rough wooden table, Sela mending a frayed sleeve, Ezekiel jotting notes in a ledger about the hog's weight and health. No words wasted, yet the silence no longer felt cold. Ezekiel looked up. Sela did the same. Their eyes met across the dim light. Neither spoke, but both knew it. In the halting days of their strange arrangement, a seed had been planted. One neither dared to name, yet both had begun to feel. By midday, the Texas sky turned sudden and strange. Clouds gathered quick as a horse stampede, heavy and dark, swallowing the burning light whole. Ezekiel stood by the hog pen, the sharp scent of rain riding the wind. He squinted at the horizon where a streak of violet fire split the clouds. "Storm's coming," he muttered, raising his voice. "Sela, shutter the windows." She stepped out from the kitchen at once, wiping her hands on her skirt. Her eyes lifted skyward, calm where his held concern. "Do we have time?" "Not much," he said, yanking a rope tight across the pen gate. "This one will hit hard." Within half an hour, the heavens broke open. Rain crashed down in sheets, hammering the roof, slashing against fences, thunder rolling across the prairie like cannon fire. The piglet shrieked in panic, stomping in the pen as the floor turned to muck. Runoff poured from the roof, spilling into the trough, the water rising fast around its legs. "This won't hold," Ezekiel bellowed over the storm. He waded into the mire, boots sinking deep, arms straining to haul a board into place. But the downpour kept pressing harder, flooding faster. Sela splashed in behind him, skirts heavy with mud, hands braced on the opposite beam. "We've got to lift it higher. If not, the hog will drown in its own pen." Together they pushed, the water biting cold, mud slick underfoot. Their hands clashed on the wet timber, hard, solid contact. Neither pulled away. Her grip surprised him, small but firm, hardened by labor. "Now, push!" she shouted. Ezekiel heaved, muscles knotted, shoulders driving. Sela threw her whole weight against the board, body bent in fierce resolve. The plank gave, wedged into place, sealing the gap in the roof. Water sprayed sideways, spilling off, and the stream into the pen slowed. The pig quieted, curling into a dry corner. They sagged back, breath ragged, rain still lashing down. Mud streaked their clothes, Sila's hair unbound by the wind, strands plastered across her cheek. Ezekiel glanced at her, and she laughed. A bright, reckless laugh split from her lips in the heart of the storm. "Look at us," she said, voice breaking through the rain. "Two fools fighting the sky to save a hog." Ezekiel, so used to scowls, felt his chest loosen. He had never seen laughter like that. In hardship, not mockery nor pretense, but honest joy at doing right, no matter how dirty. He shook water from his eyes, but his mouth tugged upward, rare and rough, a smile. The storm raged all afternoon. They stayed at the pen, scraping muck, laying dry straw where they could. Clothes clung soaked to their skin, every move bringing them shoulder to shoulder, hand to hand. They said nothing of it, but the air between breaths grew warmer even in the cold. At last the rain thinned, dropping slow and heavy. The pen stood firm, the trough reset, the piglet asleep in safety. Sela slumped onto the porch step, skirts caked in, mud. Ezekiel dropped beside her, too worn to keep his distance. Their shoulders touched, breath still hard, shivers running through both, yet neither moved away. See there? Sela tilted her face to the clearing sky where a slit of pale light showed. Even in the storm, there's ground for us to stand. Ezekiel looked up, but his gaze slid back to her face. Rain traced down her cheek, dusk's glow alive in her deep brown eyes. For one instant, he wanted to reach for her, not for rope or timber, but for this moment itself. Instead, he cleared his throat, rose, and held out a hand. "Come inside. You'll catch cold." She studied his hand, broad, scarred, still smudged with earth, then placed hers in it. The clasp was sure, warmer than she expected, strong enough to steady more than just her footing. Her heart stumbled. Together they stepped into the cabin, leaving behind the pen dripping but sound. The first rain of the season had passed, but it left its mark. They were no longer two strangers tied by a will. They had saved a life together, however small, and bound themselves in a thread of trust neither could ignore. Ezekiel barred the door and glanced at Sela. She stood by the fire, combing back her wet hair, a weary smile still resting on her lips. Something flared in him then. Not anger's blaze, but a gentler fire, fierce in its own way. He sat down without a word, yet the hardness had left his eyes. For the first time in years, Ezekiel Carter felt his heart yield, not to defeat, but to the warmth of a smile born in the rain. The night after the storm, the prairie wind blew colder than usual. The cabin still flickered with firelight, but Ezekiel Carter felt the chill sinking into his bones. At first he thought it nothing more than fatigue, the cost of slogging through rain and mud all day. But by midnight, the cold had turned to a burning heat, sweat rolling from him as though fever itself had seized him. He tried to rise, but the room spun. From the pen outside came the piglet's restless squeal, sharp as a summons. Ezekiel braced a hand on the bed frame, meaning to stand, to check, but his legs buckled, and he crumpled hard to the floor. Sela heard the thud and hurried in. She found him collapsed, breath heavy, forehead blazing with fever. For a moment her steady eyes faltered. This was the man who had stood with her against the storm, who had lifted boards in the downpour, who had clasped her hand when she nearly slipped. Now he lay helpless, undone like a child struck with sickness. "Ezekiel," she whispered, not expecting reply. That night Sela did not sleep. She drew water from the well, soaked cloths, laid them across his brow, changed them again and again as they turned warm. She swept the mud from the threshold, stoked the fire to keep the room alive with heat. Each time she looked back and saw his face tighten under fever's grip, she clenched her own calloused hands, steadying herself. Morning came, and duty called. The piglet squealed, trough empty. Sela wrapped a shawl tight around her shoulders, carried a bucket out to the pen. The earth was still wet, clinging mud thick to her hem. She shoveled feed with trembling arms, but filled the trough full. The hog ate greedily, its snorts a strange comfort. At least it lived. Returning inside, she found Ezekiel stirring, muttering in fever's haze, words broken and meaningless. She sat by him, palm resting on his brow. The heat radiated fierce, and her chest knotted tight. This was not worry for an inheritance, not even for land or will. This was for him. "You stubborn man," she murmured. "You'd sooner fall flat with fever than ever admit you're hurting." She took his hand in hers. His fingers were rigid, scarred like rough timber, yet in them she felt the weight of a life spent working to hold fast to what he believed was right. By the second day, the fever had not eased. Sela moved between pen and bedside, near spent but never yielding. Each time she pressed a cool cloth to his face, she told herself, "I must not stop. If I quit, both he and the hog are lost." That afternoon, her hand brushed against his cheek. The skin burned hot, rough with stubble against her palm. The feel startled her, but she did not pull back. Instead, she let her hand linger, stroking lightly, a wordless comfort. Ezekiel's eyes cracked open through the haze, clouded, uncertain, as though he did not truly see her. His lips moved faintly, as if to speak her name. Sela bent closer. Only fragments of sound reached her, but her heart tightened. In that instant, she felt a thread pull taut between them, unseen yet binding. By the second night, Sela herself burned with a light fever, worn thin. Still she went to the pen, scattering fresh straw, hauling feed. When she returned, she sank to the bedside, leaning back against the frame. She looked at Ezekiel, his brow furrowed in battle with the heat inside him, and sighed. "Perhaps you don't know," she said softly, "but this is the first time I've believed we might endure. Not for the will, not for the hog, but because you're fighting, truly fighting." She let her hand rest over his again, her eyes drifting shut at last. When dawn came, Ezekiel stirred awake. The fever had broken. His shirt was drenched with sweat, but his head was clear. He blinked and saw Sela slumped beside him, hair fallen loose, her small hand clasping his so tightly her fingers were marked red. He watched her quietly. For the first time in years, his thoughts were not of land or tests or inheritance. They were of the woman who had held it all together when he could not. He turned his hand gently, his thumb brushing against the back of hers. She startled awake. Her eyes, heavy with sleep, brightened at once when she saw him conscious. "You're awake," she breathed, her voice hoarse yet light with relief. He nodded, lips shaping two words he had never spoken easy. "Thank you." Only that. Yet it carried the weight of all he had left unsaid. Sela did not answer, only tightened her grip, as though sealing her choice. To trust him. Later that day, Ezekiel forced himself outside. The piglet was alive and well, the trough filled, the pen laid clean with straw. Everything still in order. He turned towards Sela. She stood with weary shoulders, a faint smile, but her eyes glowed with quiet pride. And in that moment, he knew. This trial was no longer his alone. Faith, fragile yet real, had taken root between them. Beyond the porch, the sky opened wide, washed clean with new light. Ezekiel leaned against the post, breathing deep of damp earth and cold air. In the kitchen hung the ledger where he marked each day. Today's line stood out. 3 months since they had signed the will. 3 months gone. The hog alive, the cabin standing, and a woman still at his side. The cabin seemed reborn after Ezekiel's illness. He was strong enough now to tend the hog each morning, his back still stiff but his stride sure again. Sela no longer carried the weight alone, and in her eyes the burden seemed lighter. One early summer evening, warm wind rolled off the prairie carrying the scent of fresh grass. From the pen came the deeper grunt of a hog that had grown well since spring. Ezekiel finished mucking the stall, washed at the basin on the porch, then stepped inside. Sela sat by the fire, oil lamp casting honey-colored light over her skin. She held a scrap of cloth in her lap, though her eyes lingered on the flames. thoughtful and still. Ezekiel pulled a chair across from her. For a while, silence, broken only by the snap of wood in the hearth. He cleared his throat, as if to break the weight of it. You kept this place standing while I lay flat. I owe you that. Sela tilted her head, a faint smile at the corner of her mouth. You don't owe me. If I'd let go, both you and the hog would be lost. I don't leave things half done. The firelight shone in her eyes, steady and bright. Ezekiel leaned on his knees, studying her face. 3 months had made him familiar with its every change. The furrow when she measured seed, the purse of lips at the hog's smell in the kitchen, the sudden laugh she had given him once in the storm. Sela, he said slowly, I've spent my life working, raging, and standing alone. Never thought I could be good at being anyone's husband. She looked up, surprise mingled with gentleness. Do you think I wanted a perfect husband? I had one once. He was kind, but weak. When he died, the town looked at me with pity, as if my life was fit only for charity. That pity cut deeper than grief itself. Ezekiel swallowed hard. In her voice he heard not just sorrow, but the steel of one who had stepped through it. And now? He asked softly. Sela set the cloth aside. Her hand trembled, then closed firm. Now I want only to be seen as an equal, not pitied, not dismissed. We carry together, that is all. He reached across, laying his hand over hers. Her palm was small, calloused, strong. She flinched, ready to pull back, but his grip was steady and warm. The air in the cabin stilled. They sat that way, hand in hand, eyes searching. In her gaze he saw depth, pain, and strength enough to fill the horizon. In his, she found not the flash of temper she had known, but a truth unguarded. His voice dropped, rough with vow. I'll try not to fail you. She did not answer in words, only pressed his hand, light but sure. That night, the talk stretched on. They spoke of childhoods, Ezekiel, orphaned young, raised on saddle and rope. Sela, who had studied while working, who had buried her husband too soon. For the first time they spoke without duty, without will or inheritance, only listening. When the lamp flickered low, Ezekiel drew his chair nearer. The fire's heat bridged the space. He raised his hand, brushing her cheek, eyes asking for her leave. Are you sure? He whispered, his breath warm against her skin. Sela held his gaze, fear and longing tangled in her dark eyes. She nodded once, slight but enough. Ezekiel's throat tightened. His hand slipped to her waist, his voice rough, a promise and a warning both. Once I touch you, there's no turning back. She shivered, but her answer broke soft as wind through pines. I don't want to turn back. Their eyes locked. Sela leaned, breath trembling, lips parting. Ezekiel bent, kissed her, gentle first, then firmer, sure. The clasp of hands became an embrace, drawing her close against his chest. She did not resist, her arms wrapped around him, holding as though a frayed release would break the spell. The fire roared higher, shadows of their bodies cast wide on the cabin walls. What began as hesitant gave way to release. Clothes damp with sweat slipped away. On the old wooden bed they lay entwined, breath tangled, hearts striking one rhythm. That night was more than flesh. Ezekiel discovered in himself a patience he had never known, a tenderness stronger than muscle. Sela discovered herself not as a widow marked by pity, but as a woman desired and honored. When quiet returned, Sela lay with her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat steady as hooves on prairie earth. Ezekiel stroked her hair, his voice hoarse in the hush. "If I lose land and coin, I won't regret this night." Her eyes closed, a tear warm on her cheek, but her mouth curved in a smile. For the first time, she believed this trial could lead to more than a will. It could lead to a home. Outside, the hog stirred in its pen, gave a soft grunt, and settled again. The summer wind drifted through the rails, rich with earth and promise. And inside, two souls once bound by duty gave each other something greater than any inheritance: trust, belonging, and a true beginning. Summer stretched wide over the prairie, sun beating harsh against the weathered shingles of the cabin. From the pen came the deep, steady grunts of a hog grown strong, its voice no longer the thin squeal of spring. Ezekiel rose before dawn, mucking the pen sun and mixing feed, his calloused hands sure in every motion. Yet behind him, inside the small kitchen, something else was stirring, quiet and unseen, a change that would shift the course of both their lives. Sela had always been the first to rise and tend the fire. But for the past 2 weeks, every morning found her rushing suddenly to the porch, one hand pressed to her mouth, her body folding under waves of sickness. At first, Ezekiel blamed spoiled food or the smell of livestock. But when it came day after day, and when he caught the glimmer in her tired eyes, he began to suspect something more. That suspicion sharpened one noon when he entered the kitchen and found her standing still, hand resting lightly on her belly, breath uneven. "Sela," he asked, his voice lower than usual. "What is it?" She turned, eyes glassy, but her lips curved into a trembling smile. "Ezekiel, I think we're going to have a child." The words struck him silent. The bucket nearly slipped from his grasp. Inside him, joy surged hot and bright, but with it came a heavy weight pressing down. Never had he thought himself a father, never believed it possible. And yet here, in this cabin built on obligation, life had taken root. The days that followed found Ezekiel working harder than ever. He built an awning over the pen to shield it from the sun, strengthened the fences, repaired the granary door against drafts. He counted every coin, sold off spare lumber, saved whatever could be saved. In Sela's eyes, he was no longer the short-tempered cowboy she had first known. He was turning into something else: a husband, a father, a steadying hand. But joy came with its own trials. Sela's sickness deepened. Foods she once prepared with ease now turned her stomach. The smell of meat, the sweat on Ezekiel's shirt, even the soap from the wash stirred nausea. One morning, when he stepped into the kitchen still dusted with trail dirt, she pressed her lips thin and snapped, "Could you shake that off outside first? That smell, it makes me sick." Ezekiel stiffened. Heat surged through him, the old fire ready to rise. But he remembered the plank nailed in the barn, the words carved by his own hand: 3 breaths before you act. He stood still, inhaled, exhaled. Then he nodded. "All right, I'll leave my things outside." His answer was short, stripped of anger. Sela blinked, surprised, and in her weary eyes flashed a rare warmth. Still, the days were not easy. Sometimes she turned her back at night, without a word. Ezekiel lay beside her, his hand hovering, then pulling back, listening only to her uneven breaths in the dark. He understood now. The greatest trial was not the hog in the pen, but the fragile peace within these walls. One afternoon, Sela carried water from the well. The earth was slick, her foot slipped, and the pail tipped, soaking her dress. Ezekiel rushed forward, seizing the yoke before it dragged her down. His hand gripped her shoulder, eyes searching her pale face. Sela burst into tears, water and sobs mingling. "I'm afraid," she whispered, voice shaking. "Afraid I won't be enough. For you, for the child." He said nothing at first. Instead, he pulled her close, holding her against him until her trembling eased. His voice, rough as gravel, broke low in her ear. "We'll be enough. As long as I can stand, you won't carry this alone." Sela lifted her gaze. Through tears, her eyes shone clear. In him she saw not just strength, but a vow to keep this small family whole. And something fragile yet real took root in her heart. That evening, the hog bawled for feed. Ezekiel carried the bucket out, bent low, and felt the animal nudge against his leg, grunting loud as if demanding attention. He chuckled under his breath. "Seems both hog and household are teaching me patience." From the porch, Sela watched, her hand resting unconsciously on her belly. In his worn frame, she no longer saw only the quick-tempered man she had met, but one learning to love by action, learning to endure for the sake of home. When night fell, Sela sat by the fire, her sickness eased for the moment. Ezekiel laid a small ledger on the table, every expense and task carefully noted. "We'll save for when the baby comes," he said, steady as stone. "I've done the sums. If I sell more lumber, and later the hog, we'll have enough for the three of us." Sela looked at him, lips curling faintly. She did not speak, but in her heart, trust was growing. 3 months had passed since they had signed that strange will. Now, between mornings of nausea and nights of quiet fear, joy had sprung in the old cabin. No longer were they two strangers bound by paper. They were a pair awaiting a child, waiting for the day they would call themselves family. And as the prairie wind swept across the land, both understood. The true trial was never just to raise a hog. It was to learn how to keep each other and to build together a life worth keeping. Summer fell on the prairie like a fire that would not be quenched. The sun blazed so fiercely, the grass turned gray-yellow and brittle, snapping under the heat rising from cracked earth. The cabin roof popped in the heat, timbers groaning, and in the hog pen the stench grew thick. Hot air mingled with waste and rotting feed until even the strongest stomach turned. The hog, once greedy at the trough, now sniffed weakly and lay down in the shadows, panting hard. Ezekiel worried so much he skipped meals, running out to the pen every few hours, pouring cool well water over its back to keep it alive. Sela fared no better. Her belly had only begun to round, yet nausea lingered, and the suffocating heat drained her strength. Each time she stepped outside, sweat gathered at her brow, her dark eyes narrowing against the burning light. One day in the garden, bent over a row of beans, she collapsed to the ground, breath ragged. Ezekiel rushed to her side, but she waved him off with a brittle smile. "Just dizzy," she whispered. He said nothing, but the strain on her proud face cut him deeper than her words. And while they wrestled with the sun, the town fed on rumor. Whispers rose in the saloon, in the general store, at the market stalls. They said Ezekiel had taken Sela only for the inheritance, that their marriage was no bond of love but a scheme for land. Worse, Tongues wagged cruel against her skin. A colored widow living bold on the Cross Ranch, with all the white women about, and he brought her home? The words cut sharp, spreading faster than the dry wind. Sela heard them one morning in town, fetching salt and soap. She felt the eyes, half pity, half scorn, follow her through the store. On the walk home, parcels clutched tight. Her throat burned with swallowed grief. At the cabin, she said nothing, only set down her bundles and worked in silence. Ezekiel saw the tremor in her back, but asked no questions, knowing words could wound worse than weather. The days dragged heavy. The hog ate less, lying dull-eyed in the muck. Ezekiel fought his temper, breathing deep, remembering the words nailed in the barn. 3 breaths before you act. He tried everything: corn mash, chopped greens, cold water poured steady. He even soaked his own shirt and laid it across the hog's back. Sela stood beside him, helping where she could, but shadows deepened in her gaze. That night, while he hammered repairs on the pen roof, she sat at the kitchen table, candlelight flickering over a blank sheet. Her hand shook as she wrote, "Living together has become too difficult. The terms are unfit for my health and dignity. I, Sela Johnson, cannot continue." Each word carved her heart raw. Tears fell, smudging ink. She paused, pen pressed hard. Through the door, she saw Ezekiel's outline bent under the lantern glow, shoulders straining, sweat cutting lines down his back as he lifted plank after plank. He never spoke complaint, never asked for pity, only worked as if letting go would bring the whole roof down. Sela stared, chest tight. Then she folded the paper, unfinished, and pushed it deep into the drawer. By dawn, Ezekiel went for a knife in that same drawer. His fingers brushed the paper. He opened it, read just enough to know. His face hardened, but no fire rose. Quietly, he folded it again and put it back. When Sela entered, she caught his eyes, heavy, shadowed with hurt, and then he turned away, carrying his tools outside without a word. All that day he worked harder than she had ever seen. He built an extra awning over the hog pen, dug trenches around the cabin to carry off water, hauled stones to brace the fence. Sweat soaked him through, his skin baked dark by sun, yet his hands did not falter. Sela stood in the doorway, one hand resting over her belly, watching him. She knew he had read the letter. She knew he chose silence. Not rebuke, not anger, but labor. And in that silence, her heart ached with shame and tenderness alike. When evening came, Ezekiel stumbled back, shirt clinging, hands caked in dirt. Sela carried a basin to him. Without a word, she knelt, washing the grime from his scarred fingers. He looked down at her, his eyes weary yet warm. No speech passed between them. None was needed. Both knew the storm was not over, yet both remained. The summer heat still pressed merciless. The town still whispered. The hog still hovered on the edge of sickness. But Sela set aside her complaint, and Ezekiel answered hurt with quiet endurance. And in that hard season, something stronger than any clause in a will began to bind them. It was the thread of patience, the weight of trust unspoken, and the lesson of 2 souls learning to stand side by side, against sun, against rumor, against all that threatened to drive them apart. By late summer, the heat had eased, though the prairie still split in cracks where no rain had fallen. Inside the small cabin, Ezekiel understood a truth that had taken root. If they let weariness and anger rule them, everything would come undone. He could not forget the half-written complaint Sela had once tucked away in a drawer. The sight of those words haunted him, a reminder that this trial was never only about an inheritance. It was a fight between patience and surrender. One evening, after tending the hog, Ezekiel walked into the kitchen. Sela sat by the fire, the lamp's glow painting shadows across her tired face. He took his ledger, opened to a blank page, and wrote carefully in large letters, "Household Rules." Sela looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes. Ezekiel spoke, his tone low and firm. They would divide tasks plainly. He would take the pens, the fields, the hard labor. She would see to cooking and washing. But when she was too weary, he would step in. Each week, they would sit down and take account together. Sela listened quietly, then asked, "And the money?" Ezekiel did not hesitate. "We'll keep a common purse. Every coin written down, nothing hidden, no decisions made alone." Then he added one more line beneath the rest, the 48-hour rule. Sela raised her brows. Ezekiel met her eyes, the blue of them steady. "If either of us feels like complaining, quitting, or writing that paper, we wait 2 days. In those 2 days, we try to work it out. Only if no answer comes, then we decide." His voice was rough but resolute. Sela gave a small nod, a wisp of a smile. "Sounds like law to me." The next days, those rules became more than ink. One morning, Sela came into the kitchen to find Ezekiel bent over a pot of porridge, face red from the steam. The mess smelled strong of salt, thick in one place, thin in another. Sela burst into laughter until her eyes watered. "If you keep cooking like that, the whole town will run." Ezekiel grimaced, but then chuckled too, rubbing his neck. "Pregnant women need breakfast. I'll learn. Not harder than mending fence." In his clumsy effort, she saw no shame, but closeness. At night, they sat at the table with the ledger open under the lamp. Ezekiel read each expense, salt, soap, hog feed, while Sela marked the pages. She teased him for buying too many nails. He only smiled, not rising to anger. For the first time, money no longer pressed solely on her shoulders. It belonged to both of them. Week by week, these habits settled into rhythm. On Sundays, they held council, airing small grievances before they grew large. What might once have sparked silence or fury now found its way onto the page. Sela breathed easier. Ezekiel discovered that sharing did not weaken him, but steadied them both. Through the months, the hog grew strong. In August, Ezekiel poured cool water daily into its trough, shielding it from the heat. In September, he added hay against the chill of night. By October, when prairie winds blew sharp, he built a heavier roof. Sela carried greens from her garden, chopped and mixed into its feed. They joked that the hog ate better than either of them. In truth, the animal thrived because they had learned to tend it together, through storm, sickness, and sun. By November, the pig stood broad and glossy, grunting with the weight of health. Ezekiel often leaned on the fence rail, straw between his fingers, watching it with quiet pride. Sela, heavy with child now, would rest her hands on her belly and stand beside him. They did not speak often in those moments. They did not need to. One evening, golden light spilled low across the prairie. Ezekiel perched on the fence, shoulders aglow in the dusk. Sela leaned close, one hand on the rail, the other cupping her round stomach. The hog snorted softly in the pen. They looked at each other and knew 9 months had passed. What once seemed impossible was now done. The hog had grown not only on feed and water, but on the strength of two people learning to yield and to endure, learning to laugh in the midst of hardship, learning to choose each other again and again. It had become a living witness to patience, to the bond formed slowly yet firm. Sela smiled, eyes softened. "We did it," she whispered. Ezekiel said nothing, only laid his hand over hers where it rested on the fence. In silence, their agreement spoke louder than words. That night, by the fire, Ezekiel pressed his hand gently against hers again. His voice was warm, steady. "This system, better than I thought." Sela looked at him, her eyes shimmering in the glow. "Because for once you didn't stand alone." The wind rustled beyond the walls. The hog grunted in its pen, and in the cabin the quiet was full of peace. For the first time since the day they signed that strange will, they no longer felt bound by contract. They had become a team, a home, and from the rules scribbled in a ledger, from a hog raised through 9 long months, a quiet certainty had taken root. Together, they could face whatever storm lay ahead. That night, heavy clouds rolled low across the prairie sky. The wind shifted in restless bursts, carrying a strange chill through the cracks of the cabin walls. Ezekiel sat in the kitchen, a paring knife clenched in his hand, the apple peel falling in torn strips he didn't notice. From the small bedroom came the muffled sound of Sela's voice, strained, rising sharper each time. His heart tightened. The day had come. The day he had waited for with equal parts hope and dread. After all the months of labor and worry, all the rules written into their ledger, Sela was in labor. Ezekiel had sent for Manuel Coe, the veterinarian who once treated their hog. Out here, a doctor for people was rare, and Manuel was the only man Ezekiel trusted. Soon, the pounding of hooves came over the dirt road, and Manuel stepped inside, carrying his wooden case. His nod was brief, his face calm, but urgency flickered in his eyes. "Get her into the room, keep it warm, water boiling at all times," Manuel instructed. Ezekiel obeyed, his hands trembling yet precise, as if fear had sharpened every movement. He stoked the fire higher, set pots to boil, and laid out the clean cloths Sela had prepared weeks ago. Then Sela cried out, the sound tearing through the night like a whip crack. Ezekiel rushed to her side, his large hand clumsy but steady as it wrapped around hers. Her palm was slick with sweat, her grip fierce, crushing his fingers numb. Still, he didn't pull away. He bent low and whispered, "I'm here. I won't leave you." The contractions tore through her face tight with pain, dark eyes glistening. Tears streaked down her cheeks, mixing with sweat on the pillow. Ezekiel leaned close so she could see more than his fear, so she could see his faith. Manuel's voice stayed even, guiding them step by step, his hands quick and sure. The small room thickened with heat, the scent of burning wood, of sweat, and now of blood. Ezekiel had never known fear like this. He had faced wild bulls, had been thrown hard from horses, had patched his own wounds with a knife. None of it touched the terror of watching Sela strain against the waves of pain. In silence, he prayed a rough, simple prayer he had never spoken before. "Lord, keep her safe." Between contractions, Sela gave a broken laugh, her voice trembling. You look like you're about to faint." Ezekiel shook his head, throat too tight for words. At last he muttered hoarsely, "I'm fine. Lean on me." He pressed a trembling kiss against her damp hand, a vow carried in that touch. Time bent and stretched. Minutes dragged like hours. Then, at last, through the suffocating press of fear, a sound split the air. A cry, sharp, strong, alive. The cry of new life. Manuel lifted his head, the lines in his face softening. A boy. Healthy. Ezekiel's knees weakened, and he sank onto the edge of the bed. His eyes locked on the small bundle swaddled in white, tiny limbs flailing, lungs full of power. Sela, drained yet radiant, reached her arms. When the child was laid against her chest, his cries eased into quiet breaths, his small body rising and falling in rhythm with hers. Tears stung Ezekiel's face. His calloused hand brushed over the damp, dark curls atop the infant's head. "Lord above," he whispered, voice breaking. "Our son." Sela met his gaze through her own tears, the smile on her lips brighter than the firelight. These were not tears of sorrow, but of a joy deeper than words. In that moment, the inheritance, the whispers in town, even the hog in the pen all faded. What remained was a family, small, fragile, but real. Ezekiel bent down, arms wide, and drew both Sela and the baby into his chest. His heartbeat thundered, steady and fierce against their bodies. In the cramped, sweltering room, a home had been born. Manuel packed away his tools, his face calm again. "Mother and child are strong. Let them rest." Ezekiel nodded, eyes never leaving Sela and the boy. A tenderness filled him, fierce and unyielding, chasing away every shadow. Outside, the prairie wind swept across the fences. In the pen, the hog grunted low, as if adding its voice to the night. But inside the cabin, there was only warmth, the breath of 3 souls bound together. Ezekiel tightened his hold on Sela's hand and whispered, his voice rough with awe. "We did it. Not for a will, not for land, but for this, for our family." Sela's dark eyes shone as she leaned closer, her whisper clear despite her exhaustion. Our family. That autumn came earlier than most. Winds carried the scent of dry leaves across the Montana prairie, painting the wide sky with a golden hue. The small cabin where Ezekiel and Sela had endured their trial no longer felt the same. Each morning now rang with a baby's cry, weaving itself into the steady grunts of the hog in its pen, a rough but complete music of new life. One morning, a black-painted carriage rattled into the ranch yard. From it stepped Lawyer Whitmore, his posture straight, his old suit carefully pressed through worn at the edges. He opened his leather case, his voice firm yet not unkind. "It is time to confirm the result." Ezekiel stood in the doorway, his hand resting on Sela's shoulder. For a moment, neither spoke. 9 months of labor and restraint had led them here. Whitmore laid the papers upon the kitchen table, the same table that had seen quarrels, clumsy meals, and even their weekly family councils with the household ledger. He read each line slowly, letting every word carry weight. "According to the will of the late Mr. Cross, the conditions have been met. You have lived together for the full 9 months. No formal complaint has been filed. The hog has been cared for and remains in good health. Therefore, the Silver Ridge Ranch and the sum attached will pass to Ezekiel Carter and his wife, Sela Johnson." Ezekiel squeezed Sela's hand, a light in his eyes that was not triumph but relief. Every hardship, every long breath held back, every tear shed had ripened into this moment. Sela bit her lip, her hands trembling faintly in her lap. yet her gaze glimmered with a faith she had never dared before. But Whitmore did not close his case. He slid another paper forward, his tone steady. There is, however, an additional clause. If within 3 years the ranch is maintained in good standing, profitable and stable, the entire northern tract, twice the size of Silver Ridge, shall also be granted to you. Silence fell over the small kitchen. Ezekiel's breath caught. Selah stilled, her dark eyes widening. The northern land, those rolling fields stretching to the mountains, where wild horses still ran, where rumors told of hidden water and rich soil. 3 years? Ezekiel rasped. Whitmore nodded, narrowing his eyes as though to test them. 3 years. You cannot sell nor neglect it. You must prove this ranch can sustain life, and from that, expand. Selah turned slowly to Ezekiel. In his gaze she saw both the weight of doubt and a flicker of something else, something like hope. They had survived 9 impossible months. 3 years sounded like forever, yet it also sounded like a future. After Whitmore departed, they sat together on the porch. The hog, now full grown, snorted in its pen, living proof of all they had endured. The baby stirred in Selah's arms, his tiny fingers curling around his father's thumb. Ezekiel kissed his son's brow, then looked northward, where the mountains cut sharp against the horizon. "What do you think we could plant there?" Selah asked, her voice soft as the wind. Ezekiel thought a long moment. "Apples, or corn, maybe a band of horses, more cattle too. Enough for our boy to grow up among fields that thrive." Selah smiled, her eyes carrying a dream she rarely allowed herself. "Perhaps even a school, a small one, for the children here who can't travel far." Ezekiel chuckled low. "You always think further than I do." They sat in quiet, letting the vision take root between them. The future no longer felt like a set of rules or a penned hog. It stretched wide, lasting, and belonged to all 3 of them. That night, when the baby slept soundly in the wooden cradle, Ezekiel stepped out to the corral. He leaned on the fence rail, the young moon casting a silver edge across the grass. He thought back to the day he signed that cursed will, anger boiling in his chest. He never expected to stand here months later, with a wife he cherished, a son he would die for, and a home he could truly claim. The trial had not forged duty alone, it had forged a legacy. From the cabin window, Selah watched him, her hand resting gently on her stomach, now empty but once the keeper of their child. Her dark eyes softened with tenderness. She knew the test was not over, but she also knew neither of them stood alone anymore. They had the ranch. They had each other. And now, on the horizon, a greater land waited to be theirs. If you, those who have known loss, who have stood again after falling, find a measure of peace in this tale, share your thoughts below. Tell us what has carried you through your hardest days. And do not forget to like, to subscribe, and to ring the bell for more Wild West love stories. For in these old frontier pages, perhaps you will see your own reflection, steadfast, kind, and choosing love still.